5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We are live. Coming to you live. This is Lichtman Live.
It really is.
Say what's up to the people.
And
Dad.
our audience is live. Welcome to our very savvy and knowledgeable audience. You know, the great philosopher Husserl talked about the phenomenon of lived time as opposed to clock time. If you've ever run a marathon, I have many, many years ago, the last 5 to 10 minutes of the marathon are like a month of lived time. They seem to drag on forever. So it is with the Trump administration. It's only been 7 or 8 months, and yet it feels like years in lived time because so much is happening, and of course, there's so much to talk about on this show, right, Sam?
Right, Dad. You ready to get into it?
I'm always ready.
Okay, let's do it. After Charlie Kirk's killing, Trump has launched a sweeping crackdown, tightening speech rules and expanding executive policing powers. Trump's Attorney General, Pam Bondi, is drawing fire after declaring whole categories of dissent as, quote, hate speech, unprotected by the First Amendment.
Boy, you know, that was 10 seconds and probably an hour of live time.
Right.
There's so much packed in there. But rather than starting out with what's going on right now with Trump and Bondi and Kash Patel and Stephen Miller and others, Alex Jones, I want to start on a positive note. How about that, Sam?
Oh, you do?
I do.
Okay.
I want to give you some historical examples of how American presidents have gotten it right, not wrong like Trump and his allies. It is possible to get this right, even when dealing with tragedies that have taken hundreds or even thousands of lives. And I'll give you an example of one Democratic and one Republican president.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Let's start with the Oklahoma City bombings of 1995. Do you remember those?
No, I was 3 years old.
Absolutely horrific bombing of the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City, claimed hundreds of lives, including the lives of children, because there was a daycare center for the children of federal employees. One of the worst tragedies in the history of the United States. It was during the tenure, of course, of President Bill Clinton. And Bill Clinton could have used this tragedy as an excuse for going after his political enemies on the right. Timothy McVeigh, the bomber, had far closer ties to the radical right than the suspected assassin of Charlie Kirk has to the radical left. We don't know if he has any ties at all, but Timothy McVeigh was deeply immersed in what was the far-right militia movement at the time. So it could have offered a real opportunity for an unscrupulous president who didn't care much about the Constitution to use this to demonize, attack, seek revenge, persecute his political enemies. Did he do that, Sam?
No.
Not at all. He did just the opposite. He used it as an opportunity to genuinely bring the nation together. And there are those who say he was in a lot of trouble. Democrats had suffered egregious losses in the midterm elections of 1994, some of the worst losses by an incumbent party in history. They lost control of both houses of Congress in 1994 for the first time since the early days of the Eisenhower administration, 40 years before. Everyone was talking about a one-term president. So Clinton was on his heels, but instead of going on the offensive against his enemies, he tried to bring us together. I'll just give you a couple of lines of the amazing speech that Clinton made. Quote, "The anger you feel is valid, but you must not allow yourselves to be consumed by it." So recognizing that people are angry, but saying, don't let the anger consume you and control you. The hurt you feel must not be allowed to turn into hate. Don't turn this into hating on your enemies. Instead, turn it into the search for justice. The loss you feel must not paralyze your own lives. Could that be any more different, Sam, than what we've been hearing from Trump and his allies in the aftermath of the Kirk tragedy?
Pretty different.
Yeah. And let's start with a Republican now. An even bigger tragedy. You know what I'm talking about, don't you?
9/11.
9/11 took thousands of lives. And I'm talking about President George W. Bush. Who perpetrated that bombing, Sam? Do you know?
Al-Qaeda?
Yes, and what kind of organization were they?
A terrorist organization?
Yeah, but what kind of terrorists? What were they?
Islamic.
Supposedly Islamic terrorists, exactly. And again, Bush could have used this as an opportunity to exploit xenophobia, anti-Muslim sentiment in the United States, to go after Muslims, to go after immigrants, to claim his political opponents were soft on immigration.
Well, he certainly used it for some pretty bad things.
I get to that. Yes, I understand that.
Okay, I'm just saying.
But in the immediate aftermath of 9/11, he was extraordinary, like Clinton, bringing us together rather than exploiting it. He said, "I also want to speak tonight directly to Muslims throughout the world. We respect your faith. It's practiced freely by many millions of Americans and by millions more in countries that America counts as friends. Its teachings are good and peaceful, and those who commit evil in the name of Allah blaspheme the name of Allah. The terrorists are traitors to their own faith, trying in effect to hijack Islam itself. The enemy of America is not our many Muslim friends. It's not our many Arab friends. Our enemy is a radical network of terrorists and every government that supports them." I think that was George W. Bush's finest moment of his presidency.
Yeah,
Would you agree?
It got a lot worse from there.
Got a lot worse, and I'm going to talk about that. All right. So you could do it differently. There are great historical models from both sides of the aisle. And I could talk about, other presidents as well. But I think that Republican and that Democratic model shows you what could be. But sadly, it isn't. Now I want to talk about some historical examples on the other side where political leaders have exploited tragedies or kind of exaggerated tragedies, not to knit the nation together, not to speak to the greater angels of our being, but to divide us. And I first want to talk about, I'll do one Democrat, one Republican. I want to talk about the Great Red Scare of 1919. There was anti-communist hysteria in the United States after the Bolshevik Revolution and the end of World War II. Totally unfounded, but there was this belief that the United States was under threat of being overturned by internal communists. Totally exaggerated. And there were some bombings and attempted bombings. One life was lost. And in those days, a lot of conservatism was in the Democratic Party, particularly Southern Democrats. That didn't change, particularly in the election of 1994 in the late 20th century. And one of those Democratic conservatives was A. Mitchell Palmer, the Attorney General of the United States. And he used these incidents and the fear of communism to go after left-wingers and particularly immigrants. He arrested people on the streets in their homes. Sound familiar? No warrants, no judicial proceedings. And guess what he did with every immigrant that he could, Sam? He deported them, setting a precedent for subsequent deportations. And these were not illegal immigrants. That notion was not yet developed except for the excluded Asians. That didn't develop until a little bit later with the Restriction Act of 1924. And this was exploited in the United States, get this, Sam, to greatly escalate anti-Semitism. Guess who was blamed for communist agitation?
Jews.
The Jews. You know, Henry Ford, the leading industrialist of the time, published a 4-volume set of books called The International Jew, the World's Foremost Problem, in which he said the Jews were plotting to dominate the world, as supposedly described in the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, a forged document from the old Russian Tsar's secret police. He believed that the Jews were behind the communists. Hear a lot of that today as well. A U.S. House investigating committee dominated by Republicans talked about the Jews leading the American Communist Party. The district organizers are responsible for communist activities throughout the nation, forming districts among factory workers, political campaigns, and others. Quote, a large percentage of all the known communist district organizers are, guess who?
Jews.
Jews. Exactly. So you can see all the negative implications when you try to turn an event, you know, which may be dangerous and tragic, into an attack on alleged political enemies. And this isn't so much an attack on political enemies, but it is another pretext for a supposed tragedy to create a much worse tragedy. And again, I'll pick on a Democrat here, picking on Democrats a lot tonight. You know who I'm talking about? Lyndon Johnson. Did you ever hear of the famous Tonkin Gulf incident?
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, basically a fabricated story that North Vietnamese boats had attacked 2 American destroyers, the Maddox and the Sea Turner Joy. Nobody knows if they were ever really attacked. It was bad weather. No one was injured. No damage. But you know what this became a pretext for?
The Vietnam War.
The Vietnam War, a decade of war that claimed tens of thousands of American lives and perhaps some millions of Asian lives. And of course, it's not a president, but you've heard of the infamous Joe McCarthy, one of Donald Trump's heroes.
Yes.
And he used an alleged communist infiltration of the U.S. State Department to launch a wholesale attack on left-wingers, people of deviant sexuality, supposedly, as they called it. They had much worse names for it in those days, destroying the lives of many Americans and not rooting out a single communist threat to the security of the United States. And of course, we know that Vladimir Putin used the pretext of Nazis taking over Ukraine as one of the justifications for his horrific, bloody, aggressive invasion of Ukraine. So, there's a right way and a wrong way to deal with these matters. And Donald Trump and his allies are going about it in all the wrong way, becoming another cautionary tale, another negative example that generations of Americans will look upon with scorn. Even before Sam, he knew who the suspect was, right? Much less anyone had confessed, right? They didn't know who had committed the act. He was blaming the left, claiming this violence is due to left-wing extremists. And he has continued, not only rhetorically to attack that, many of his allies have called for war. Exactly the opposite of what George W. Bush did after 9/11 exactly the opposite of what Bill Clinton did in 1995 after the Murrah Federal Building bombing. He has taken all the wrong lessons of history to try to exploit a tragedy. And in so doing, basically, he and Pam Bondi trashing the Constitution. You cannot prosecute and imprison people because they say things you do not like. There's no quote-unquote hate speech exception to the First Amendment. Plus, what they consider hate speech, Sam, you know what that is. It's not real hate speech.
Right, just left-wing speech.
Yeah, it's any speech that criticizes them. In fact, when a journalist asked Trump a question about Bondi's claim to prosecute hate speech, you know what Trump said in response?
No.
It's people like you that are going to get prosecuted because you're so nasty. He sued the New York Times for $20 billion simply because they're critical of him. Yep. You know, critical speech. And remember when the media platforms were trying to censor hate speech? Who screamed loudly, most loudly in protest?
Trump.
Donald Trump. But hate speech that he likes is just fine, but any speech that criticizes him is not. In fact, he said, when asked about how he's going to crack down on left-wing violence, he said, yeah, would he consider naming the anti-fascist group Antifa? Is Antifa a group?
I don't know.
Who are they?
I don't know.
No, it's a generic name for those who oppose fascism. It's not an organized group like the Proud Boys or the Oath Keepers.
Are you sure about that?
Positive.
All right.
I have followed the news on Antifa. No one has ever been able to identify an organized group called Antifa. Okay. Whenever someone, who doesn't agree with Trump politically, they label them Antifa, right, this left-wing terrorist.
No, I know the right wing uses it as a broad sort of boogeyman, but I don't know if there is any sort of formal group or not.
No one's able to identify them. And is there any evidence? Of course, so much of this was said before they even knew who he was. Is there any evidence, if there was an Antifa, that this suspect was associated with them?
Not that I've heard of.
Nothing. Is there any evidence he was associated with any left-wing group?
No.
No. None. So Donald Trump says, yeah, I would consider calling Antifa a terrorist organization. The article goes on to say, as always, it isn't clear who or what exactly Trump would designate. Antifa is a loosely organized movement without a distinct leader or membership. That seems pretty clear.
Yeah.
But the idea that you are going to, whatever it is, you're going to label groups simply because they disagree with you, even though it had nothing to do whatsoever, as far as we know, with the tragedy of the murder of Charlie Kirk. And then to have the Justice Department going after people on the basis of, quote, unquote, hate speech, which is pretty much nothing more than any speech that happens to disagree with them. And here's something really significant. Trump has, cherry-picked violence. Inciting political violence. He cited some examples of political violence against Republicans. What did he leave out, Sam?
Any violence perpetrated by far-right extremists.
Or any violence against Democrats, like the former Speaker of the House, like Nancy Pelosi's husband, like Josh Shapiro, like Gretchen Whitmer, leaving out people who seem to be spewing right-wing rhetoric, right, about invasions, who killed about a dozen people in the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, 19 people in El Paso. I don't remember, but a number of people at a black church a number of years ago. All that stuff is, or how about those who perpetrated crimes in gay nightclubs? There's a huge body count from all of that, and it's totally ignored.
Yep.
And I want to go over this again, even though I went over it last time, because it's so important. To listen to Trump and his allies, you would think left-wing extremist violence is a national plague, a national epidemic, a national calamity. Does he ever say anything about right-wing violence?
No, of course not.
All right. 2024 study by the National Institute of Justice. Since 1990, far-right extremists have taken, in terrorist attacks, 520 lives. During the same period, far-left extremists took 78 lives. That's a more than 6-to-1 ratio of right-wing violence to left-wing violence. That's why the study concludes the number of far-right attacks continues to outpace all other types of terrorism, by the way, including radical Islamic terrorism. Far-right extremists have committed far more ideologically motivated homicides than far-left or even radical Islamist extremists. But you would never know that listening to our government. And here's the kicker. Here's something nobody knows. I went to look this up again to double check it, and guess what?
What?
I couldn't find it. It's been scrubbed from the government's website by Donald Trump. He doesn't want you to know the truth. And that is a classic hallmark of authoritarianism. Every authoritarian government in the history of the world has tried to conceal and hide the truth from you and substitute for the truth their own ideologically driven pretensions. What could be more transparent and what could be more obvious than Trump scrubbing this study from the federal government's website?
Yeah, pretty clear what they're trying to do.
Doesn't refute it, doesn't present another study, just wipes it out as if he didn't exist. There are other things he wants to wipe out too, Sam, I think. No, let's move on to wiping out other things.
Well, we've got, I don't know what you mean exactly by that. I mean, we
like
got
the slave picture.
Yeah, well, we've got a couple other stuff before that.
You're way ahead of me as always.
I want to say something that's been troubling me about this Charlie Kirk stuff is, it seems that there is more of a public cry. It's seen as more of a tragedy. It gets more attention than, for example, all the children who have been killed in American schools through the past, 20 years.
47 school shootings.
Okay, let me finish my thought.
Yep.
I'm a big fan of the NFL. I'm a big fan of UFC as well. And many NFL teams and the UFC did moments of silence and tributes to Charlie Kirk. And you can debate till the end of the day if that's appropriate or not. But what bothers me is, has the UFC ever done any sort of moment of silence for, again, all the children who have been killed from gun violence, all the schools that have experienced school shootings? Have these some of the NFL teams, to their credit, did do a more general moment of silence this weekend, but a lot simply did Charlie Kirk tributes, which, again, I'm not going to debate whether that's the right thing or the wrong thing to do. I'm just upset that our country seems to care more if you're famous and you experience gun violence than if you're a child or shopping or in a synagogue. It's, I think, a symptom of a deep sickness that our country seems to care more about and be sadder about Charlie Kirk than they do about all this other gun death that happens. And, today I titled the show about Charlie Kirk, and it really bothered me because I do have this big issue of, I think what happened to the guy was horrific. I think it's a tragedy. But at some point, using his name, talking about him constantly, it just feeds into this fire of the American public only caring about this kind of stuff if, they're a media personality or they're famous or they have some sort of, parasocial connection to them. Gun violence and death in this country expands far beyond Charlie Kirk.
You couldn't be more right, Sam. 41 gun murders a day. Not a month, not a week, not a year. A day. It's about 15,000 gun murders, or gun homicides is perhaps more accurate technically. Donald Trump is off in the UK, right?
Right.
The American rate of gun homicides per capita is 300 times that of the UK. Not 3, not 30, 300 times. UK has all the same problems we do: gangs, drugs, mental health. The fundamental difference is how they control their guns. And this is true across the board of our peer nations. So Trump is in the UK. I have an op-ed you should check out. I think it's coming out tomorrow in a very prominent British publication called iNews, in which I say, I don't expect this to happen, but I wish Donald Trump would use his visit to the UK to try to learn how it is that the UK is able to hold gun homicides to a minuscule fraction of those in the United States. Now, I know I've heard the gun lobby say, oh, but they make it up for stabbings. No. Even when you account all kinds of homicides, the United States has 6 times per capita as many homicides as the UK. So it's not, the difference is not being made up in other types of murders. Wouldn't that be wonderful if he tried to learn something, believe it or not, something good and positive in the UK, and then work with the British government to try to bring together democratic nations to curb violence worldwide?
0% chance that happens.
Yes, I'm a crazy dreamer.
Yeah, I mean, that's literally, I think, as close to zero as
that's a true
possible.
Zero. Yes.
I mean, it seems very clear that the Trump administration's answer to gun violence is more guns, more militarization, more policing, and
more violence against our enemies. They declared war against the left.
Right, but yeah, and it seems like their base is eating that kind of stuff up. It seems like that sort of game plan is working for them. It seems like a lot of people are pro more police,
Here's
pro
why.
more militarization of cities, etc.
Here's why. It's all in my book, of course. Conservative at the core. I've looked at 100 years of conservative history, and throughout that, one of the hallmarks of American conservatism, particularly because they think, you know, they're God ordained to save America. You know, just listen to Mike Johnson. He thinks he's got a pipeline right to the Almighty. Because they think they're sanctified by God, then their enemies are not just, or political opponents, are not just wrong on policies. It's not just a matter of how much you should tax or regulate or how much Social Security you should be paying out. Sure, those are significant, but it goes much deeper than that. They think their opponents are enemies of the real America, that their opponents are damned. You know, Newt Gingrich, you know, many, many decades ago said that. He said, you know, it's a matter of our enemies versus real Americans. You know, one conservative activist, I don't remember exactly who, said this again many years ago, said it might have been better to have the Japanese win World War II than to have the leftists take power in America.
You know, it's interesting. I think today Kash Patel during his hearing was bragging about how low crime rates are across America and how Trump is bringing these, you know, great low crime numbers. At the same time, this administration is trying to say that we should militarize U.S. cities because crime is so out of control. I mean, how can both be true at the same time?
Look, you can control crime by militarizing the country, setting up a military dictatorship. I've seen it on my travels elsewhere. But you destroy your country in the process, and crime was already plummeting. It's at a 30-year low in most big cities and most of America. And I haven't seen the data yet, but at least impressionistically, it seems like the National Guard deployment in D.C. has really hurt business and tourism in the district. Yeah, you can be safe if you got a soldier on your corner, but that's not the way we should be living.
And as soon as those, we've talked about this, it's a Band-Aid solution.
Right.
There's going to be people. I already saw an article today, someone predicting the D.C. crime boomerang effect, that it'll come back even worse once the National Guard leaves. But I guess we'll just have to wait and see what happens.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on because we're getting thin on time already. So Trump, speaking of Charlie Kirk and Trump skipped Charlie Kirk's vigil to spend time that evening at his golf course. Critics and even supporters blasted him on social media for being absent.
This is just incredible. He's so self-righteous about Charlie Kirk's death, something we should all honor, give our current lives to honoring Charlie Kirk. And yet, at the first serious event to truly honor Donald Trump, a lot of officials were there.
To honor Charlie Kirk.
What did I say?
You said to honor Donald Trump.
No, to honor Charlie Kirk. Donald Trump thought it was more important to go to one of his golf courses. If that doesn't show the hollowness of his sanctimonious rhetoric about Charlie Kirk, I don't know what does. Richard Nixon tried to get out of things by saying, don't listen to what I say, follow what I do. And that's a good motto to understand Donald Trump.
Dad, the National Park Service will remove a famous photo of an enslaved man's scars, saying it could traumatize visitors, sparking debate over how history is told.
Can you show that?
Yes, one moment.
All right. This was a very important picture back, during the controversy over slavery, because it showed, slavery was not this benign institution, but was a horrible, brutalizing, dehumanizing, destructive institution, one of the worst institutions ever devised by human beings. And I'm not saying every slave got beaten by this, like this, of course not, but every slave would be subject to this kind of beatings. But Donald Trump doesn't want us to acknowledge the horrors of slavery, doesn't want to acknowledge 100 years nearly of Jim Crow discrimination, doesn't want to acknowledge that any iota of discrimination still exists in our country. He wants to purge our history of anything that counters his political orthodoxy. You don't have to believe me. Just read his Project 1776, his officially endorsed account of the American experience issued at the very end of his first term. Virtually every scholarly organization in the country, about 50 of them, joined with the American Historical Association to denounce this report, saying it's not history, it's political orthodoxy. It takes no account of historical scholarship of the past 40 years. And, Trump talks about accuracy. It's riddled, with errors.
If you believe Trump is about accuracy,
yeah, right.
Even if you're his biggest supporter,
yes,
you cannot come and tell me you actually believe Trump is about accuracy.
Final point. He doesn't want to acknowledge slavery as contrary to American democracy, but he loves to do what, Sam, with the Confederacy? Set up monuments, rename bases after Confederates. That's fine, even though they were treasons. They were traitors who shed blood of hundreds of thousands of Americans, with many, many millions projected today's population, in defense of slavery. But they were white people. So apparently they're okay, but depictions of slavery are not. Not surprising. Trump does not list slavery, racial discrimination, gender discrimination, xenophobia, anti-Semitism, or any of those things as an enemy of America, but he does list progressivism. As one of my historian friends says, and he equates progressivism with fascism and communism. One of my historian friends said, oh, now I got to teach that meat and drug inspection and women's suffrage equals Hitlerism.
Yeah.
That's how crazy all this is. Now, there is an article just came out tonight that the National Park Service is denying that they are ordering the scrubbing of this photo.
Oh, they're denying that this... I thought they were denying that Trump ordered it. No,
yeah. It's unclear, as always, with statements coming out of the administration.
Okay.
But certainly their intention is to scrub all these negative images. The executive order is crystal clear. Whether this image gets scrubbed or not, maybe it won't because of the backlash, but no way to tell from the kind of word scrambles we get from the administration.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the hypocrisy in all these issues is so rampant, but at a certain point it makes me want to kind of bang my head again. It's like, well, there's nothing I can do about it, They can just run around and be as hypocritical and talk out of both sides of their mouths and be as immoral as humanly possible and
claim it's all sanctioned by God.
Right. That's my point. It's like, what the heck?
Yeah.
I mean, I get frustrated by it, but the frustration just turns into sort of numbness or hopelessness or...
Well, Sam, we're doing what we can.
No, I agree. I agree that the first step is to talk about it. But at some point, you just talk about it and talk about it and talk about it. It becomes sort of like you're in Groundhog's Day or something. I know. It's like, I agree. You can't just not talk about it. But at the same time,
they'd love for you not to. They're trying to silence.
Of course.
Even the mildest critics.
No, of course. But also at a certain point, it just feels like we're just kind of spinning in a hamster wheel talking about it all the time.
Remember I talked about live time? It does seem like 10 years of live time. It's only 7 months.
I know.
Hard to believe.
Crazy.
I was on this show with this right-wing host, guy named, I forget, Leland something. And he was trying to say Obama and Biden were as bad as Trump in attacking the Constitution and democracy. And he went through 12 years, right? They served for 12 years. Cherry-picked what he could and couldn't come up with anything close to what Trump had done in just 7 months. 12 years.
Yeah, for sure.
Leland Vittert, that was his name.
All right, our next topic. 5 new members were added to the CDC's vaccine advisory panel, shaping a key meeting on COVID and flu shots amid fierce policy debates.
They don't debate policy in HHS. They don't debate science. Not even close. All of their reports have been blasted by independent scientists. They want to validate their own biases, which enormously threaten our health, the health of Americans. They already canceled research on the most promising of vaccines, the ones you can produce most quickly. Kind of throwing cold water in the face of Donald Trump's, warp speed vaccine, Operation Warp Speed. They're cutting vital health information, vital health research, and perhaps severely limiting our access to life-saving vaccines. None of it backed by science. Every credentialed, independent scientist, medical researcher has blasted what's coming out of the HHS. You put a biased quack scientist in charge, and this is what you get. And it was all predictable. Everything that's going on is predictable.
Yep.
No one should be surprised. You were warned.
Except that he was going to win. That was the only thing.
That was the only thing that surprised. At least it surprised me.
Yeah. Trump says the U.S. Navy sank another alleged Venezuelan drug boat, killing 3 crew members, part of a string of controversial maritime strikes.
This is part of Trump's claim that as president, I can do anything I want.
I'll be right back. I'm going to turn on the AC. Keep going.
And that would include extrajudicial executions. There was no judicial process, no proof. First to kill 11 people, now to kill 3 people. They may not be Americans, but they're human beings. And to kill them just on one person's say-so is horrific. Who's next? If Donald Trump can do whatever he wants and kill people with no proof and just in his say-so, think how chilling that is. And he claimed again, if you just look at the waters around, you can see all this, huge amounts of drugs. Well, Reuters, an independent journalistic wire service, checked the video that they provided, and they said it showed no such thing. It was so blurred, you had no idea what it showed. So, and there's been no proof either that the first attack that killed 11 people had anything to do with smuggling of drugs. But it doesn't matter. You don't deal with drug smuggling by blowing people up. We have a Navy. We have a Coast Guard. These are small boats. They're not hard to intercept. And if you intercept them, you can verify whether there are drugs. You don't have to kill people.
Our final topic before we move on to questions. An appeals court rejected Trump's bid to fire Fed Governor Lisa Cook, protecting her independence and dealing another blow to White House overreach.
No kidding. Two issues here. One, even assuming what this Trump loyalist, and we only have his word for it, is true, that there's some issue with her claiming twice that two different properties were her primary residence, it is not at all clear that that would constitute cause for firing a Federal Reserve governor, since it had nothing to do with her duties on the Federal Reserve and occurred before it. But again, there's no proof here. Has she been indicted, Sam?
No.
Has she been convicted of anything?
No.
Has she pled guilty to anything?
No.
No, there's been no process whatsoever. And now there are reports, guess what?
What?
That this Trump sycophant was either lying or mistaken. That it turns out there is now evidence, and because there's been no process, we can't really sift it through, but there is serious question as to whether what this Trump loyalist said is true, because some evidence surfaced that on one of those properties, she called it a vacation home, not a primary residence. Perfectly legal to have a mortgage on a primary residence and a mortgage on a vacation home. So this may be, another political hit job.
All right, with that, we will move on to questions. Before we do so, some housekeeping. We have 1,200 people watching, but only 400 likes. Make sure to like the stream. It helps a lot. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. Turn on that notification bell so you know we're live. Members and donations get priority on questions.
Yeah, we're working hard. We need those members and donations. You see, we do our research. We don't just come in here and, spout some party line.
You're a smart guy, Dad.
We don't even know what the party line is, so we can't spout it.
Our first question. When will MAGA realize what they voted for and that America has a gun problem? Also, do you think the mass firings by Kash Patel may have had something to do with what happened to Mr. Kirk? Also, do you see any parallels with the vessel assassination and martyrdom in 1930?
Yeah, there's a little too much there.
There's a lot of questions there.
Yeah, I'll try to deal with the first one because it's the most important. There is no sign whatsoever that MAGA is going to wake up to the scourge of gun violence in America. I've been speaking and writing about this for years. And by the way, the American public, Sam, is on our side. Overwhelmingly, the American public favors reasonable gun controls. And that's all, those of us who want to reduce gun violence are talking about. We're not talking about confiscating people's guns or banning guns. We're talking about things like prohibiting, large capacity magazines and semi-automatic weapons, which easily can be converted to automatic. These things have no use other than to kill large numbers of people as quickly as possible. We're talking about, more effective background checks. And these are overwhelmingly supported. But the gun lobby, the gun manufacturers, they seem to have a lock-death grip upon members of Congress on the right side of the aisle. And I think, again, there's a lot of religious ideology plugged into this. I've done a deep dive because I wrote a whole book called Repeal the Second Amendment, The Case for a Safer America. I did a pretty deep dive into the gun lobby, and they are very much motivated by the same notion that, we're ordained by God. We have a God-given right to keep and bear arms to protect ourselves, much less this phony constitutional right, which was fabricated in the late 20th century by the NRA and then picked up by Justice Scalia in the 2010 Heller decision. There was not a shred of evidence that the Second Amendment was meant to establish an individual constitutional right to keep and bear arms as opposed to keeping and bearing arms for a well-regulated militia. I've made this point before, but I want to make it again. A slaveholder wrote the amendment. Slaveholders voted for it in the House and the Senate. Slaveholders ratified it in the states. Would slaveholders for one moment have supported an amendment that would have given even free black people the right to keep and bear arms? Not in your life. But because it was tied to a well-regulated militia, they could vote for it because blacks were barred from the militia until many, many decades later.
Have you heard about how right-wingers are working to get a lot of people who are, quote, celebrating Charlie Kirk's death fired from their jobs? For the record, many of them aren't even celebrating it. They're just quoting what the guy said.
Absolutely. It's horrific. This is McCarthyism. You know, McCarthy made all these unfounded accusations, inflammatory, with no proof, and it cost a lot of people needlessly their jobs. It ruined people's lives. You know, one of the things Charlie Kirk said that, was one of the worst things he said was he doesn't believe in empathy. Thinks empathy is a bad thing. Well, when you get rid of empathy, you sort of open the door to doing anything you want to other people without it affecting you at all. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. A complete lack of empathy.
How is this distracting from Epstein, the client list, and the birthday card?
That's an excellent point. We've had so much to discuss, but we haven't gotten into that. The more they inflame people about Charlie Kirk, and the more they create controversy. So now their critics are focused on this, and the Epstein client list and the birthday card situation seems to have slipped away. You don't hear much about it, do you, Sam, anymore?
It was just projected on in England on the castle.
Yeah, that was so cool.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's going away. I think it's still Freddy Krueger and the Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yeah, I don't think it's going away.
No, it'll go away for a while, but it's coming back.
Cash Patel said that the Epstein documents that he had show that they Maxwell and Epstein trafficked children to nobody.
Oh, come on!
You didn't hear? He said he claims that's what the document. He didn't claim that.
Oh.
They never did, but he claimed that the documents that he has don't show that they trafficked these children to anybody.
So nothing happened with Prince Andrew, huh? And no reason why the UK ambassador to the U.S. just got fired and recalled to England because of his relationship with Epstein. He just trafficked these children to nobody just because he liked to have hordes of young children around him.
He hedged his bet saying that the documents in his possession didn't say that they trafficked them to anybody in particular.
I don't know what that means, but,
Yeah.
You can take anything Cash Patel has to say, and you know what you can do with it.
Throw it in the trash.
At least maybe do it what the great philosopher David Hume said you do to works of superstition. Burn them in the flames.
Yes.
Throwing it in the trash isn't good enough because it could, like Freddy Krueger, emerge again.
Right.
Got to burn it. And I couldn't believe it. I watched some of that hearing and it made me sick. Cash Patel criticizing Cory Booker because he wasn't bringing the nation together.
Yeah, what a joke.
Oh, my God.
How does Trump benefit from deploying National Guard troops in the red state of Tennessee. If you haven't been following that, there has been some conversation that at first it seemed like he was going to send National Guard troops to Chicago, and then it seemed like maybe he was pivoting to Memphis, Tennessee.
Two things. He got massive resistance in Chicago. It might have been an unholy mess, not just legally, which was certain, but also on the streets of Chicago. That would have made Trump look bad if what he did provoked violence. So go to a friendly venue like the state of Tennessee, which is not going to resist. Plus, this enables Trump to answer his critics. See, I'm not targeting only blue states. I'm also going after cities in red states. Has he deployed it yet, though?
No.
He just said it.
You just said it, yeah.
Yeah, we'll wait and see if that ever becomes real.
I agree with you, Dad.
Hey, remember Trump said a month and a half ago or so, a long time ago, I'm giving Putin 2 weeks?
Oh, but Trump always sticks to his word, Dad. He must have kept him to that 2-week deadline.
He held him right to that 2-week deadline, yeah. that Putin has blown through for about a month with nothing. Zero.
All right. This is a $10 donation from the Mad Hatter.
Hey, remember also Trump said, I'm going to have this was 7 years ago, a way better health plan than the Affordable Care Act? Yeah. 7 years?
Yeah.
And what did he come up with in the debates, I think? We have concepts of a plan. We haven't even seen that. 7 years.
Yeah. $10 donation from the Mad Hatter forever.
Good. We need these donations.
How often are the achievements by the least popular or memorable presidents overlooked, and should their legacy be reevaluated? Like Ford, often seen as mediocre, signed the Safe Drinking Water Act.
Yeah, Ford has been, was derided in his own time, and things were pretty bad under Ford, let's face it. Terrible economy, the loss of the war in Vietnam, the pardoning of Richard Nixon. But there were some good things, like you mentioned that. He also had some very positive deregulation. But it's very hard to say overall that his presidency was a success. But other presidents have been positively reevaluated. Harry Truman was one of the least popular presidents of his time. Until Richard Nixon, he left office with the lowest approval rating ever. And he's still second, I think, or close to it. And he's been reevaluated over time, and now most historians regard him as a near-great president, in large part because he built the Western alliance, the collective security that's kept us safe for so long, and that Donald Trump is now for the first time threatening. Same thing with Dwight Eisenhower, who was considered, kind of a slow, passive, not quite with it president who'd rather be playing golf. He was a big golfer. But he's also been reevaluated, did some amazing things like the national highway system, and kept us out of war, which was not easy, given the height of the Cold War in the 1950s.
Why was Dukakis mocked for the tank stunt? Is it because he looked goofy in the helmet? Did it feed into an already existing perception? What was the tank stunt? I'm not
that he had this commercial sitting in a tank, kind of dressed up, like he was going to a fancy dinner. It just looked bad. That wasn't him. But of course, it was reinforcing an existing perception for his enemies. He was being blasted for being soft on defense and soft on crime. So this was kind of an incongruous image. The campaign of 1988 featured the second most notorious commercial in American history, the Willie Horton ad. Willie Horton was this horrific, of course, fierce black criminal who was let out on a pre-existing furlough program. Lots of states have them, and engaged in a crime spree, I believe, including raping a white woman, or at least attacking her. And, Lee Atwater, who became a friend of mine and ran that campaign, said, we've been so effective with this that the American people think Willie Horton is Mike Dukakis's running mate.
That's a good one, Dad.
It's a good one. I every once in a while I got good ones. I've come up with a lot of quotes tonight.
Yeah, honestly, I've always been impressed with your quoting. I've never been much of a quoter. I don't know. I don't really care about quotes that much, so I don't memorize them, or I don't know what it is, but you seem to be a quote guy.
I'm a quote guy, but my diminished capacities with age, I still can come up with them.
I don't think you're that diminished.
No, probably not.
No.
How much time do we have?
5 minutes.
All right, keep going.
Would you support universal independent redistricting in exchange for ending no-excuse mail-in voting?
Absolutely not.
What's no-excuse mail-in voting?
No-excuse mail-in voting is adopted by the great majority of states, including our state. It means you don't have to claim you're sick or out of the country to vote by mail. You can vote by mail without an excuse, and that really helps disabled people, elderly people, vulnerable minorities. It's a terrible thing to give up. So no, I would not make that exchange. It's giving up too much, although I certainly support, and you've heard me many times, redistricting reform and deplore what's happening with gerrymandering.
This is from a fellow Jew. They say, as a fellow Jew, I have to ask you this. You say that with the exception of when under Netanyahu, you support Israel, or something to that effect.
I didn't quite say that, but go on with the question.
Even before Netanyahu, Israel has done horrible things to the Palestinians, including when it was founded with the Nakba.
Look, you've heard me say this many, many times. There are horrible grievances on both sides. This is one time I will say both sides. And each side, can tell its own story, its own narratives. That does not mean I don't support the right of Israel to exist and thrive. I still support that, but I deplore the Netanyahu government. I think he is disaster for Israel. I think he's committing atrocities in Gaza. I think the Jewish people have always been a moral beacon to the world, and he's turned the state of Israel into a moral catastrophe, a moral pariah. So my opposition to Netanyahu has nothing to do with my belief in the survival and thriving of Israel. Just as my opposition to Donald Trump doesn't mean I don't believe in the survival and thriving of America. That's a very important distinction to make.
Right, but I think their point is that this, and I mean, you touched on this, but a lot of the horrible things that Israel has done goes long before Netanyahu.
Not even close to what Netanyahu has done. There have been wars, but they were real wars. This is not a real war.
What about something like the Nakba, which is considered a pretty horrific historical event?
It's pretty, but doesn't compare to what's going on now.
Okay. I mean, I have to say, as a Jew myself, as I learned more about a lot of Israel's actions, I already had, I never went on birthright because I always just found it this kind of weird sort of, indoctrinating process. I've always had a little bit of skepticism about Israel, but
look, here's the thing too. It's this little tiny country, most of the time, well under 10 million people, surrounded by all of these enormous, heavily populated Arab, Muslim countries, many of which have declared, like Iran, we want to destroy the state of Israel.
Right.
So, in pursuit of their survival, they've done some pretty questionable things, but it's easy for us to sit here in very safe America, and make those kinds of criticisms. And I do. And it's fair, but that does not override my belief in the survival of Israel. And I believe Netanyahu goes well beyond anything we've ever seen before.
Do you think maybe the Western allies made a mistake? I mean, I know my perspective is most folks who fled to Israel were refugees, whether they were Jewish refugees in the Middle East, North Africa, Europe, right? From the 1800s and the pogroms in Russia to World War II to the Holocaust, etc., right? But do you think maybe they made a mistake picking Israel itself? Again, it's this tiny little,
They had no choice. Where else were they going to go? No nations wanted them. Franklin Roosevelt organized a conference, the Evian Conference, in the late 1930s when Jews were really being threatened in Germany. And his objective was to try to find, and he invited all the major nations of the world to find places for Jewish refugees. And it was a spectacular failure. The Washington Post accurately called it the Yes, But Conference. Yes, we sympathize with the Jews, but not here. And one of the not heres was the United States. Congress and the public were implacably opposed to expanding the number of Jewish refugees coming into the United States, even Jewish children. That's what they were facing.
Yeah, I get that. But it doesn't seem like Israel has been a very good, safe beacon for Jewish folk. So, it's like, at what point do you be like, yeah, maybe there was no other option, but the option they picked was about as worse as you could possibly get in some ways.
Look, sometimes you just have to deal with the realities. There wasn't another place to go. Plus, a lot of Jews, particularly the more religious Jews, felt that this was their legitimate historic homeland. You got to understand that. Both sides have claims to this little tiny region of the world as being their historic homeland.
And I guess the part that always kind of trips me up is, again, I believe Jewish folks around the world were truly refugees, just like people coming from Central America, Mexico to America. A lot of them are refugees as well. A lot of immigrants just in general in this day and age are refugees too. But I do wonder, even if you do pick Israel, right?
They didn't pick it.
Okay.
It's not like, we have these 5 choices and we're going to pick Israel. They had no other choice.
That's not my point. Maybe I didn't use the right word. No matter what happened, you were going to displace millions of Palestinians to make room for Jewish people.
I don't think it was millions at the time.
Hundreds of thousands. So it's like, it kind of seemed
that is
doomed.
A problem.
Yeah, that's my issue.
Of course.
It's like, it seemed doomed from the start. If you're starting a nation where you have to remove hundreds of thousands, displace hundreds of thousands of people.
And you know what?
That's not going to go well.
It's exactly how we founded the United States. Who did we remove? Not just hundreds of thousands, millions of indigenous peoples. Right. Either removed them or, more to the point, killed them.
Right. And I guess that's the great debate is like, nation building seems to always be pretty horrific. And
always.
What's the sort of moral sort of decision? I mean, obviously we can't make the decisions now 500 years after they started genociding the Indians. I don't know. Anyway, maybe this is too long of a debate to get into.
It's way too long a debate. People have debated this for decades to no end.
Right.
The only thing you can say, and I've said it 1,000 times, there are legitimate grievances for both sides of this. The only time I'll ever say both sides. Otherwise, it's the phrase I want to abolish from the English language.
What about both sides of the Giants' offense and defense stinks?
Actually, the offense was pretty good.
Oh, right. That is true.
They can't put it together, though.
Right.
They had a good defense in Game 1 and a terrible offense. Great offense in Game 2 and a terrible defense, which goes to the coaching. The coaching is abysmal. And you would think New York, you could find some good coaches. You would think. All right, how much time?
We're out of time. We're 3 minutes over.
Oh, okay.
All right, with that,
I don't mind going a little over. As I said, it's years of live time, even though it's 7 months.
Yeah. I want to give some shout-outs to people who donated. Philip H., Tanika Washington, Joanne Roberts, George, Politis, Honolulu Water, Fried Jemmy.
Thank you. We really need it. Did we get any members?
Did we get any members? Let's see. One new member. I don't know who that was. Let me see if I can find them real quick.
All right. Thank you.
George, Honolulu. Nathan Casey Grant also donated.
We're almost up to 172,000 subscribers. So
I think we're up to 172.
Are we up to 172? Yeah. So we've grown 2,000 in the last 2 or 3 months.
Yeah.
All right. Good night, all.
All right. Lichtman Live Post Show comes up right after this.
Aren't you guys lucky?
Say goodnight. Oh, what's your final word to the people tonight, Dad?
My final word is there are some very positive models to follow. If only we could see that today.
Okay, thank you all. See you on the post show.